Running back Kenneth Walker carried the ball 26 times against the Kansas City Chiefs, ran for 107 yards, had 2 receptions on 2 targets, but only mustered 2 receiving yards, finished with 11.5 fantasy points, and that was good for running back 20 on the week. And Kenneth Walker has been no better than the running back 20 each of the last 3 games, and yes, he's been dealing with an ankle injury, and he's been a DNP this week already. But he gets the New York Jets this week as well. And the Jets were able to bottle up Travis Etienne to some pretty inefficient numbers in week 16. But still, the Jets are going to be faced by a heavy Kenneth Walker volume. Seattle's just going to continue to run it down their throats. We've seen Kenneth Walker 4 different times this year have at least 21 rush attempts. So it wouldn't surprise me if Kenneth Walker fits into that mid-pack running back 2, but he has 3 straight games without a touchdown, at least on the ground. And so Kenneth Walker, mid-pack running back 2, he's getting into your lineup because of the volume. Seattle is 7-8 right now, and they're battling for their playoff lives. They're fighting for that last little spot, and if they can win out, then there's a possibility, if a lot of things go right, that Seattle could make it happen. But ultimately, Kenneth Walker and DK Metcalf are the 2 big pieces in this offense with Tyler Lockett out. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Now, Lockett did get a practice in today, Wednesday, but I'm not certain that Lockett will actually play against the Jets this weekend. So Kenneth Walker, he's going to get a lot of touches. He had 28 touches in this Kansas City game, only 53% of the snaps. But Walker, you're firing him up as a solid running back 2, a volume-based running back 2. That's how I'm approaching Kenneth Walker. He doesn't quite have the touchdown upside that he had weeks 5 through 9, but if he falls in the end zone, he could be a back-end running back 1 for you in your championship week. Running back DJ Dallas handled 8 touches in this Kansas City game, week 16. Dallas was inactive the previous 2 games against Carolina and San Francisco. This was not a surprising role. DJ Dallas getting the 6 targets, 6 receptions for 32 yards, not super efficient through the air, but we know Kansas City gives up some of the most passing yards and receptions to running backs on the year. It wasn't surprising that he got a little bit of a role shift with Kenneth Walker handling 26 carries in this game. Dallas handled 46% of the snaps, but it was because the Chiefs had a pretty good handle on this game. I don't anticipate that DJ Dallas has as significant of a role against the Jets. I think this is going to be a game at least more evenly matched, and I don't think that DJ Dallas is going to reprise his role as 6 target, 6 reception type of back against the Jets in Seattle. It may be a shootout. It may be one of those higher scoring games, but I'm not anticipating DJ Dallas being a 40+% snap share type of player, even though that is what he's been the last 2 games. I just think that Kenneth Walker is going to be out there for primarily the rushing downs. And because it's going to be close and Seattle likes to run the ball, then it's going to be still a lot of Kenneth Walker. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. I'm not putting DJ Dallas in as a back-end running back 3. That's not where I'm putting him. He's more of a running back 4, back-end running back 4 for me in this week. He does have, at least we saw the role, the 6 catches, 6 targets. I don't think that's going to be super sticky. It's the first time he's had more than 2 targets in a game this season. So DJ Dallas is not a player that I'm looking to throw in my lineup. If you are in a super deep league and you need somebody with a pulse, DJ Dallas is a guy, I suppose, but not someone that I'm super optimistic about. Not a lot of touchdown upside here either. Didn't matter if Tyler Lockett was in the lineup or not. DK Metcalf is going to get his 9 to 12 targets, and that's exactly what he got against Kansas City. He went 7 for 81. 9 targets. He finishes the wide receiver 25, 11.6 fantasy points, no touchdown. And DK Metcalf, yeah, he hasn't scored in the last couple games, but he gets the Jets in week 17. And this is a situation I'm monitoring, partly because we don't know if Tyler Lockett is going to play. Lockett is trying to work his way back from a hand injury and did practice this week. And the Jets are a tough secondary to face, no doubt about that. But if there is a big play player it's going to be DK Metcalf. And if there's going to be a big time plays, Metcalf is your guy. And there have been 2 different games this year where DK Metcalf has exceeded 125 receiving yards. He has 6 receiving touchdowns on the year. And Metcalf is the wide receiver 13 in PPR. 86 receptions is already a career high. He's over 1,000 receiving yards. He's one of those guys that you're not really changing your status on. He's a high-end wide receiver 2 entering this matchup, regardless of what happens at quarterback, regardless of the matchup, regardless of whether Tyler Lockett is in the lineup or not. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. DK Metcalf, you're starting him. You're playing with confidence. And he may bust, he may not, but looking at his game logs, right, DK Metcalf hasn't finished worse than the wide receiver 38 since week 7. And he's finished just outside the top 30 of wide receivers twice in that span. He's been very, very consistent, mostly a mid-pack wide receiver 2 the rest of the way. He had 1 wide receiver 7 finish against the Rams where he had a touchdown, 8 receptions for 127 yards. But other than that, DK Metcalf, he's fit what he's averaging out to be, which is a high-end to mid wide receiver 2. And if Lockett plays, I think he's still a wide receiver 2 in this game, even against a tough secondary. So fire up your DK Metcalfs, playing with confidence. Don't worry about the Jets secondary. Tight end Noah Fant finished with 8.2 fantasy points. He caught a touchdown in the Week 16 game against Kansas City. Tight end 13 on the week, 2 for 12, receiving 3 targets in the game. And Noah Fant is not practicing Wednesday, which is concerning. He missed the first 2 sessions before capping it as limited entering the weekend. We will see if he suits up. If he does suit up, if he does play, Will Dissly is actually going on the IR. He went on the IR today, and I think that Noah Fant gets a bump up, but also Colby Parkinson is a deep league tight end consideration. If you are just throwing a dart at tight ends and you need somebody, Colby Parkinson is probably not going to be rostered very much. But Noah Fant is my preferred tight end between the 2. He's just more athletic, and he's had some production on the season. He's tight end 17 on the year. In fact, 3 of the last 4 games, Noah Fant has finished as the tight end 13 or better, including a tight end 2 finish back in week 13, where he went 4 for 42, had the touchdown. And Fant has had the touchdowns as of late, 3 of the last 4 games with a score. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. But he's fallen below the 60% snap threshold each of the last 3 weeks. That's a little concerning. We will see what the role is for Colby Parkinson. But as I said, if I have a choice between a Seattle tight end, it's going to be Noah Fant. Better athlete, better pizza, Papa John's. Play your Noah Fant if he's active in your deeper leagues. Running back Jerick McKinnon, he did what he did. He had 5 carries for 7 rushing yards, 3 receptions for 31 yards, and a touchdown. So he had 38 total yards on 8 touches. Not super efficient, but he finishes the running back 21 this past week, 11.3 fantasy points. You're not going to be upset about it. He didn't match the running back 1 overall that he had in week 14 or week 15, but he reprises his role against a Denver team whose coach was just fired. Nathaniel Hackett was just fired. So I don't think that Denver improves any since that meeting. And the Chiefs have things to play for. They're 12-3. They want to secure that bye. And so I think that the Chiefs do play their players in week 17 against Denver. And Jerick McKinnon has proven that he's a part of that. McKinnon, each of the last 4 games, at least 47% of the snaps. And he handled 8 touches, which is his fewest over the last 4 weeks. But you can't be angry at the role he's had and the dynamic play that McKinnon has provided you, given his late draft capital, or if he was a waiver wire darling for you. So Jerick McKinnon, you're firing him up as a back end running back too, with elite upside that we've seen against Denver. So you're finding ways to put Jerick McKinnon into your lineup as a flex player, running back too, and I prefer him over Tyler Algier, for instance, this week in PPR. And half PPR, I could see the argument for Tyler Algier or even in standard, but Jerick McKinnon still is getting a lot of touchdowns. We're talking 5 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks, 6 over the last 4 weeks. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So you're not hating the role that Jerick McKinnon has. He's been running back 21 each of the last 4 weeks, and his sleeper, the drafters on sleeper right now are taking him as the running back 16. I think that's a fair spot for him, a high to mid pack running back 2 as we're entering this week 17 game against running back Isaiah Pacheco. Had 14 carries for 58 yards, had 1 catch for 32 yards, 9.5 fantasy points against the Seattle Seahawks, finishes the running back 26. You're not upset about that either. Yeah, he didn't fall in the end zone, but this was the highest snap percentage that Isaiah Pacheco's had since week 12, 49% of the snaps. So it's a pretty clean, even split between Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco. McKinnon got 3 targets in this game. Pacheco had 2 targets in this game. And at least Pacheco's starting to get a couple targets sprinkled in. If Jerick McKinnon ever goes down, I'm not sure that it's going to be Ronald Jones being the third down back. I think Pacheco's just going to get an uptick in target usage, and maybe Jones will siphon off a couple carries here and there. But I think Pacheco has secured his role as the lead rusher for the Kansas City Chiefs. He's had at least 13 carries in each of the last 7 games. So Pacheco is a very safe floor type of running back. Since week 10, he's had 2 games in the running back 30s. He's had 2 games in the running back 20s, and he's had 3 games in the running back 11 to 19. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So I like Pacheco as a safe running back 2 entering this week 17 game against Denver. And the last time he played Denver, 13 for 70. He had 3 receptions for 23 yards, 10.8 fantasy points, running back 19. Don't hate it. You don't hate it. So there are worse options for you than Isaiah Pacheco. You're fine with putting him in your lineup for week 17. He's probably not going to win you the week, but I don't think he's going to lose it for you either. And he's got a really safe floor with 15 touches in each of the last 7 games. Wide receiver Kadarius Toney got on the board, and Toney finished with 1 reception. It was an 8-yard touchdown. He finishes the wide receiver 43. Played 30% of the snaps, but that was the highest snap percentage since week 10. Toney left the game early week 11 against the Chargers and was eased back week 15 against Houston. Very, very interesting that he could square off against Denver and is being dramatically under drafted. He's being drafted on sleeper as the wide receiver 86 for this week. Way, way too low. Way too low. And I know Denver has a good secondary, but Kadarius Toney is Kadarius Toney is a human joystick. His juke rate is the highest among all wide receivers. Last year, 67% of the time, he was juking out on the field. So yes, you are getting in on starting your Kadarius Toney. As a deep league, a dart shot, right? Obviously, the consensus is way behind on Kadarius Toney, and he's always a threat to score in his games this year. Right, in 5 games. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Since the trade, he's scored 2 touchdowns and just has been super efficient. And that's what you're going to get with Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball. Kadarius Toney is a deep league consideration. He's not a confident start. You're not like confidently putting Kadarius Toney into your lineup. There was a chance that Michael Hardman was going to play in the week 16 game. We're still awaiting the Michael Hardman status for week 17, but it would be good news if Michael Hardman doesn't play week 17, so Kadarius Toney could get a little bit more work and continue to integrate himself into this Kansas City Chiefs offense. Just when we thought Juju Smith-Schuster was safe, right? Juju came off of 2 straight games with at least 10 targets and at least 9 receptions and at least 74 receiving yards. Juju instead finishing as the wide receiver 58 in week 16. He did play 83% of the snaps, 3 for 27 on 4 targets. Not a great look. And I think this is just the hit or miss nature of Juju Smith-Schuster in this Chiefs offense. Right. We had seen earlier in the season Juju going 3 for 10 or 6 for 79 and finishing as the wide receiver 52 or 5 for 46 or 3 for 33 or 2 for 33 or 3 for 38 or 3 for 35. Juju Smith-Schuster has the upside of a top 5 wide receiver. He's finished as wide receiver 7, 7, and 4 on the season. He's had those weekly finishes, but it's pretty much boom or bust, thrive or die for Juju Smith-Schuster. And against Denver, last time against Denver, 9 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown on 11 targets. He finished as the wide receiver 7. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 15, which I feel is a little bit high. I know that he did well last time against Denver, but maybe more like wide receiver 18 to 20. I would feel safer with Juju Smith-Schuster. He's still like a back to mid pack wide receiver 2 is my immediate valuation for him. But this is the wide receiver 15 draft position on Sleeper is, I think, a little bit aggressive. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So if I were to pick, I would pick lower than wide receiver 15 for Juju Smith-Schuster for this week, but you're still getting him in your lineup. The chance that he hits is 50-50, I think. He either busts for you, finishes as a wide receiver 45 or 50, or he becomes a wide receiver 7 or better. That's the nature of Juju Smith-Schuster this year in the Kansas City Chiefs offense. He's just not consistent. Quarterback Daniel Jones has played well this year. Like, we have to give credit where credit's due. Brian Daboll has done a good job of having Daniel Jones work within a structure. And as we saw in week 16 against Minnesota, by the way, he was in all of my start columns. He was a massive, massive start. You always start your quarterbacks against Minnesota when they're playing at home in that dome. These games can turn into shootouts really quickly. And that's the kind of game that it turned into. Daniel Jones, 30 completions, 42 pass attempts, 334 passing. He had a passing touchdown and a pick, rushed 4 times for 34 yards. So that was a nice little sprinkling, finished with 21.7 fantasy points. And that was his 3rd best outing of the year. Week 7 against Jacksonville, he had nearly 29 fantasy points. Week 11 against Detroit, 26.5 fantasy points. And that's what I was saying about Daniel Jones last week, was that this is a very interesting matchup because Minnesota gives up a lot of fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks and opposing wide receivers down the field. And that's where we saw the other 300 passing yard game is Detroit, who gives up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks and a lot of fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So now we're shifting a little bit to Indianapolis. Now you're thinking to yourself, oh, Indy is really, really tough against opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers. They are. They just held Justin Herbert to less than 10 fantasy points in week 16. But Isaiah Rodgers, arguably the best cornerback on the team, a shutdown cornerback, lands on IR, is going to be out for this game in week 17. So the secondary is not as scary as you might think. I don't think that Daniel Jones is going to get to 300 passing yards or even 250 passing yards. In fact, Daniel Jones has only thrown for 230 or more passing yards twice. And when he did, it was over 300. So I'm not optimistic about Jones getting that yardage through the air, but on the ground, Daniel Jones has had at least 20 rushing yards in every game but week 6 and week 12. So you're very happy with what Daniel Jones has been able to sprinkle in on the ground. I think this is a safe play. If you are comfortably ahead, you're projected to win by a lot, Daniel Jones is probably not going to bust for you. He's only had 2 games where he's finished with 3 games fewer than 13 fantasy points. Only 2 of those games below 10 points, and one of them was 9.04 and one was 9.9. So really, Daniel Jones has not been obliterated by opposing defenses, and I don't think an Indianapolis Colts team that is probably going to start Nick Foles again and is struggling in all facets. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. I think Daniel Jones and the Giants are going to be getting the ball a lot. And that's going to mean just a little bit more fantasy points, fantasy goodness for your Giants. And the Giants are 8-6-1. So they're battling for the playoffs. They are not a fraud. The defense has played very, very well. And Jones has played admirably, not just in real life, but also in fantasy. Jones is the quarterback 10 on the year, and he has 617 rushing yards, averages 5.5 yards per carry. He has 5 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's only thrown 5 interceptions in 15 games. Talk about not turning the ball over and being accurate. This is a very, very interesting player. And look, there have only been 4 games this year where Daniel Jones has thrown a pick, and one of them was in Minnesota. So I'm not worried about Daniel Jones. He's got a nice floor, and I think that's why you're starting him. He's going to be comfortably quarterback 10, quarterback 12, and he's being drafted as the quarterback 15 right now. And I get it. There's not maybe a ton of upside to Daniel Jones because of the passing, the limited passing. Jones has only thrown for 2 or more touchdowns in 3 games this year. But you have to like the rushing. You have to the efficiencies, not turn the ball over. And the loss of Isaiah Rodgers is going to be really, really big. That's going to hurt the Colts a lot for this game. Daniel Jones, I think, is a start for you. It depends on who else you have, right? You're not starting him over Allen or Mahomes, or it looks like Hurts is not going to play. Daniel Jones in a championship matchup, he's probably not going to be the reason. If you lose, he's probably not going to be the reason you lose. About 2 weeks ago, I went on the GOAT District podcast, and I was asked by Theo Greminger, who's my deep cut league winner? Who is it? And I looked through the list, and I landed on Isaiah Hodgins. And at that time, Isaiah Hodgins had played 60, 59, 70% of snaps, and he was getting involved, but only had a couple targets. He had 7 targets for the New York Giants from weeks 10 through 12, but weeks 13, 14, 15, and 16, 28 targets, averaging 7 targets per game. And then in this Minnesota game, he just exploded. 8 for 89 on 12 targets. He had a touchdown, finishing as the wide receiver 7. Talk about a deep cut league winning possibility as a wide receiver. You plug him into your flex, boom, you were very happy. So Isaiah Hodgins is a player that, yeah, Indy is tough against opposing wide receivers, no doubt about it. But this is a player who's generally pretty low ADOT. His yards per target on the season, 8.3. And it seems he's just getting 8 to 10 to 12 yards per catch. And that's it. He's not a deep threat. He's not a big play waiting to happen type of wide receiver, but he's finished as the wide receiver 21 or better in 3 of the last 4 games. You're not hating that for Isaiah Hodgins. You're finding a way to get him into your lineup, even against Indy. He's the wide receiver 48 being drafted. And I get the fear of the Indy secondary, but Isaiah Rodgers isn't there. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. The Giants are going to find ways to get Isaiah Hodgins the ball. There have been 4 different games so far this season where Isaiah Hodgins has at least 6 targets. So Isaiah Hodgins is a nice little piece. You should be interested in making sure he's at least off of your waiver wire. Pick up Isaiah Hodgins as a deep league consideration. Wide receiver Richie James was also very impressive in this game. He had 8 catches for 90 yards on 11 targets, finished as the wide receiver 20. And the difference between James and Hodgins ultimately is that Hodgins caught the touchdown. But Richie James also has 3 touchdowns in the last 6 games. You're not hating that either. He finished with 13 fantasy points. And we'll see who lines up on the outside and who plays in the slot. But he's being drafted. Richie James is being drafted as the wide receiver 49. I don't hate that as an upside play, or at least someone who has, over the last 6 games, 4 of those times he's gotten at least 12 fantasy points for you. And some of those games, 50% of the snaps, 22% of the snaps. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So Richie James is a player with Wan'Dale Robinson out. He's been a player that's been heavily targeted, heavily relied upon, and has played better than Darius Slayton at times. No shade to Darius Slayton, but Isaiah Hodgins and Richie James have had better games as of late. Darius Slayton went 4 for 79 in this game, and he's the deep threat. He is the high ADOT. The yards per target is extremely high for Darius Slayton. We're talking We're talking 10.4 yards per target for Darius Slayton. That would be a career high. And then his yards per reception, 16.1. That is also a career high. So if we're talking a deep threat, if you are down by a lot, like Isaiah Hodgins, I would say is your safe play in the New York Giants wide receiver core. But Darius Slayton is your more upside play. He's the high ADOT. The possibility for a touchdown, I think, is lower because if you're tossing the ball up, it's a lower probability chance that he comes down with it. But we've seen some big yardage games. 95, 86, 90, and 79 since week 10. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So Darius Slayton is a boom bust wide receiver 3 for me right now. And if he gets in the end zone, could be very interesting. I view him as a higher upside type of player compared to Isaiah Hodgins, but a much scarier lower floor. So it depends on what you need versus Hodgins going into week 17 if you're that desperate for a flex play. Running back Dalvin Cook got his 17 touches in this game against the Giants. They weren't super efficient, and he didn't get a touchdown. So he finishes the running back 27 on the week, 14 for 64, 3 for 13 through the air. And we all knew that Indy game, week 15, the 95 receiving yards were just a fluke, right? Before that time, Dalvin Cook had no more than 30 receiving yards in a game. Looking back at 2021, there were 2 times where Dalvin Cook eclipsed the 30 receiving yard mark. But back in 2020, there were 4 different times. So we've seen 4 to 2 to 1 to, we'll see if he can finish with more than 1 this year. But the receiving game has been where we've seen decreased efficiency. Dalvin Cook is still going to get his rushing volume. You're not going to be unhappy with that, but I think he should be valued as more of a low-end running back 1, high-end running back 2 than the mid-pack running back 1 he's being drafted as right now. I know that the Green Bay Packers give up a lot of fantasy points to opposing running backs, and this game is in Green Bay. The weather usually is very cold and snowy these days. Last time, though, against Green Bay, Dalvin Cook went 20 for 90 and 3 for 18 through the air. So he had over 100 total yards, but he finishes the running back 20, did not get a touchdown. He could finish with 18 fantasy points, and that would get him into that back end running back 1 territory. Fine. But I'm still concerned that the lack of efficiency will struggle to see Dalvin Cook get there against the Green Bay Packers. The Minnesota Vikings want to win this. They're already in the playoffs, though, but the Green Bay Packers need Packers. And the Packers are one of the worst defenses at stopping the run, at least as of late. So you're firing up Dalvin Cook. You're playing him with confidence. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. I just don't know if he gets to that high-end running back 1 that you're hoping he can. The lack of efficiency this year has been glaring. So I'm not playing Dalvin Cook with that expectation. But he's not going to fail you. He's not going to be – he's finished – Dalvin Cook has finished outside the top 30 of running backs just twice this year. So he's going to be a pretty safe play for you regardless of what happens in this game as long as he's healthy. And that's the thing with Dalvin Cook. He stayed healthy this year. He has not missed a game. And in fact, there's only been 1 game where he's dipped below a 60% snap share, and that was way back in week 5. Dalvin Cook is perhaps one of the safest running backs you can play this week. KJ Osborne, if he puts you into the fantasy champion semifinals, he did not come through for you at all in week 16 against the Giants. 3 for 17 at wide receiver 71. He played 69% of snaps, only 3.2 fantasy points. And this was more on par with what we had seen from KJ Osborne this season. Coming into that week 14-15 stretch against Detroit and Indianapolis, KJ Osborne had finished as the wide receiver 70 or worse in 3 straight games, week 11, 12, and 13. And I think that's going to be more of the same. KJ Osborne is going to face off against the Green Bay secondary that's really, really tough and led by Jair Alexander. We'll see if Alexander squares off against Jefferson or squares off Adam Thielen. But KJ Osborne is not a wide receiver that I am confidently starting or even taking a nice upside shot on. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. I think this is a game that the Minnesota Vikings are going to lean pretty heavily on TJ Hockenson and Dalvin Cook in the running game, and Justin Jefferson's going to get his, but I think KJ Osborne might be the odd man out, or him and Thielen might be the odd men out in this game. Yikes, how the mighty have fallen. Adam Thielen, 1 catch for 6 yards on 5 targets. Yikes. If Adam Thielen does not get a touchdown, it's disastrous. And the Green Bay Packers are one of the toughest defenses against opposing wide receivers. And it's not like Thielen has been unhealthy this year. He's played every game, and he's played every game at least 77% of the snaps. So Thielen is just not a start. You're looking to bench him in this game. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 32 against Green Bay, which I get it. If he falls in the end zone, he gets there for you. And if there's a touchdown making wide receiver, it's Adam Thielen and it's Mike Evans and maybe just a couple other touchdown making wide receivers. That's their calling card. But Thielen at 32, we've seen some real inconsistency this year. And I don't think this Green Bay matchup outdoors in the cold is going to be the banner day for Thielen. He went 3 for 36 against Green Bay Packers. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Last time they played in week 1, that was ages ago, and it was in a dome. So Thielen, he's a sit for me this week. I'm not playing him with any sort of confidence. A player you are playing with confidence, TJ Hockenson. Hockenson had 16 targets in the week 16 game, and he finished with 29.4 fantasy points, 109 receiving yards, 13 catches, 2 touchdowns, the tight end 1 on the week. He's being drafted at the tight end 5, and I can only think of really Travis Kelce as a better option at tight end, maybe George Kittle, but that puts like Hockenson, Kelce, and Kittle in that top 3 tier of tight ends. Ever since week 9 against Washington, TJ Hockenson, at least 6 targets in every single game. He's eclipsed 70 receiving yards 3 times since week 9. And he finally got the touchdowns in week 16. And I think this game against Green Bay, I think the Packers are tough against the tight end, tough. But I'm not like benching TJ Hockenson for almost anybody. Like even Kittle, I would roll with Hockenson and Kelce. Like if you got Hockenson and Kelce, hopefully it's a tight end premium league. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. But I think there's only really one other tight end you're comfortably starting ahead of TJ Hockenson this week, and it's Travis Kelce. So Hockenson is a must start for you. And you've got to be happy with his involvement in this Minnesota offense. Unfortunately, to the chagrin of Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne for the majority of the season since the trade week 9. Running back Ezekiel Elliott has finished at least as the running back 16 in every game he's played since week 6. And he has at least 14 touches in each of those games that he's played since week 6. You're firing him up as a high-end running back too. Right? Running back 16 each of the last 2 weeks. Yes, his snap share has flirted between 45 and 55% pretty much since week 6, but that doesn't matter. Zeke is used at the goal line, and it's against Tennessee. I know that it's a tough Tennessee front 7, but I don't know if you saw the injury report. Tennessee is sitting almost all of their starters for this week 17 game, and Dallas has games to play for. This game matters to the Dallas Cowboys. So you're firing Zeke up as a high-end running back too, touchdown upside. This game is already, at last I saw it was plus 10.5, Dallas over Tennessee, Tennessee plus 10.5, or Dallas minus 10.5 if you want to view it that way. It's Zeke time. You're going to feed Zeke. You're putting him in your fantasy lineups. I can't imagine you having 2 players on your team that you're starting over as 2 running backs. You're starting over Ezekiel Elliott. And if you do, Ezekiel Elliott is a clear flex play with touchdown upside. We're also monitoring the Tony Pollard situation, because Pollard is officially questionable for Thursday night. He has a thigh injury, and he's been missing practice all week. He did travel with the team to Tennessee, but we are monitoring this situation very closely. Ezekiel Elliott becomes a mid-pack running back 1 for week 17 if Pollard ends up missing, because he's going to get some of the work, a lot of the work. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. But I also think that there's going to be a little sprinkling of Malik Davis as well. We saw Malik Davis top out at about 33% of the snaps in games that Zeke missed. But if Malik Davis falls in the end zone, we're talking a high-end running back 3. So Ezekiel Elliott still, we're monitoring the situation. His floor is like a running back 2, and his ceiling, if Tony Pollard doesn't play, is a mid-pack running back 1, even with 60% of the snaps. Tony Pollard did not have a good game against Philadelphia. He went 9 for 19 on the ground, but he made up for it. 6 for 61 receiving. He had 8 targets. That was a season high. He tied a season high with those 6 receptions, finishing as the running back 22 on the week. You have to wonder if that thigh injury played a part in his inefficiency on the ground. Tony Pollard officially questionable for Thursday night's game against the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott bumps into that running back 1 slot and is mid-pack running back 1 if Pollard misses. But Pollard right now is being drafted on Sleeper as the running back 10. So the consensus right now is still that Pollard plays. And if he plays, this is an upside sort of matchup where we've seen Tony Pollard in 4 of the last 7 games finish as a top 7 running back. And even in games where he missed out on efficiency, the last 2 games against Jacksonville and Philadelphia, each less than 4 yards per carry, even in those games, running back 19, running back 22. So the floor for Pollard is a low-end running back 2. The ceiling is a running back 1 overall. But I think we're going to lean on, if he's active, that low-end running back 2 realm. That's where I'm thinking Tony Pollard ends up being if he's active. If he is not active, then of course you're taking him out of your starting lineups, but at least we're going to get news right away on Tony Pollard as to whether or not he sits. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. There has been some chatter about him seriously sitting in this game. So that's how I'm going to prepare as though Tony Pollard does not play, but be willing to put him in as a low-end running back 2 into this Tennessee matchup if he is in fact active. I don't have the low-end running back 1 expectations that maybe many in the consensus in the industry have for Tony Pollard going into week 17 if in fact he plays. If you're looking for a deep cut running back and Tony Pollard does not play, Malik Davis is an interesting play. And it's because when Ezekiel Elliott was out, Malik Davis in week 8, 33% of the snaps, he went 8 for 23, had 2 receptions for 18 yards. In week 10 against Green Bay, he played 13% of snaps, 5 carries, 38 yards, 7.6 yards per carry. That's pretty nice. But then Minnesota, really tough against opposing running backs. 18% of the snaps, 7 for on the ground, 2 receptions for 22 yards. And then week 13 against Indy, when the game was a drubbing, right? 3 for 29 on the ground, almost 10 yards per carry. And he had a rushing score, finishing as the running back 27. So in a game that could get out of hand pretty quickly, we could see some garbage time rush from Malik Davis, especially if Tony Pollard is inactive for this week 17 game against Tennessee. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So just put Malik Davis on your radar as a possible deep cut. That if you need a pulse at running back, Malik Davis might be it if Tony Pollard sits. Wide receiver CeeDee Lamb has been crushing as of late. At least 120 receiving yards each of the last 2 weeks, right? 7 or more targets and 7 or more receptions each of the last 2 weeks. And he had 2 touchdowns against Philadelphia, finishing as the wide receiver 1 overall. This was the second time on the season CeeDee Lamb finishing as the wide receiver 1. Once again, back against Green Bay in week number 10, he went 11 for 150 and had those 2 touchdowns. So we've seen Dak Prescott hyper target CeeDee Lamb, and against Tennessee, who gives up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position, you are firing up CeeDee Lamb. His over-under for receptions on Sleeper is 5.5. I am very much in on the over on 5.5 receptions for CeeDee Lamb, 71.5 receiving yards. CeeDee Lamb has done that in 3 of the last 5 games and 4 of the last 7 games. And in a really, really plus matchup, in a game where Dallas wants to be aggressive and put their pedal to the metal, I'm in on CeeDee Lamb this week. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 5 for the week, and I could see it getting even higher than that. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. I think wide receiver 5 is fine. I'm not scoffing at it, but against a really generous secondary, CeeDee Lamb is not only a must start for this week, but you need to raise your expectations of CeeDee Lamb. He's been crushing lately, and it's good to see Dak Prescott looking for him down the field. We've seen 11 and 18 yards per target each of the last 2 games. That's really, really nice. Wide receiver Michael Gallup earned 7 targets against the Philadelphia Eagles. He caught a touchdown, had 4 receptions for 36 yards, finished as the wide receiver 24, and it's hit or miss against Gallup. But if there's a plus matchup, you're firing him up against Tennessee. I think this is an upside play. 2.5 receptions. I'm taking the over on 2.5 receptions and the over on Michael Gallup, 32.5 receiving yards. It's really, really plus matchup, and I think that Dallas is going to be looking for him. And this is the 4th time in the last 5 games that Michael Gallup has been targeted at least 6 times. And the 2nd time in the last 4 games, he's been at least a wide receiver 2 for you. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So I'm playing Michael Gallup. I'm looking at him as an upside flex play. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 37. I think we can get him into that at least wide receiver 30 or better on the week. I like his upside against Tennessee, and especially if Tennessee is resting a lot of its starters, this could be a very, very generous game for Michael Gallup and the rest of the Dallas Cowboys. Tight end Dalton Schultz had 4 targets in this game. He went 3 for 43, 5.8 fantasy points. Yeah, he didn't fall in the end zone, and he finished as the tight end 20. But you have to be happy with the 43 receiving yards. It's the 2nd most receiving yards he's had since week 10 when he had 54, and then he had 87 against Houston. He is a plus matchup against tight ends, and if we're thinking that this is going to be a slaughter of Dallas versus Tennessee, he is rolling out Malik Willis, right? Willis gets sacked a lot, turns the ball over a lot. This is a game where I think the Cowboys are going to have a lot of possessions. And Schultz being drafted at the tight end 7 on Sleeper, I think that's a fine ranking for him. I'm okay with that. He's finished as a tight end 5 in 2 of the last 5 games. He finishes the tight end 1 as well back in week 12 against the New York Giants. He's consistently going to give you 4 or more targets. We've seen 6, 8, 7, and 10 targets in addition to those 4 target games since week 8. And there's only been 2 games this season where Dalton Schultz did not get at least 4 targets, and only one of those games did he play more than 60% of the snaps. So really Dalton Schultz has busted for you in 1 game this year. Sure, 3.7 fantasy points isn't going to do it for you, but at least he doesn't goose egg, and he is one of the most trusted pieces of this Dallas offense. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. If there's somebody who fall in the end zone, Dalton Schultz has 3 touchdowns on the season, and he had a cluster of them in week 2 against the Giants. So Dalton Schultz, I don't know if you have many other better options. This is a question, maybe Taysom Hill, maybe Dalton Schultz, but I'm starting Dalton Schultz over Darren Waller given the Derek Carr news. So Malik Willis, right? We got to talk about the Tennessee quarterback. In the 3 games where he started for Ryan Tannehill, he finished as the quarterback 31, quarterback 25, and quarterback 21. And he has, in those starts, a combined 25 completions in those 3 starts. So he's averaging 8 completions per game. He hasn't thrown for more than 99 total yards. At least in those starts, 2 of those 3, he had 40 rushing yards or more. But there's literally no upside. Malik Willis has not thrown a passing touchdown this year, and he just rushed for his first touchdown in week 16 against Houston. So Malik Willis is not on even the quarterback streaming radar. You're not looking to put him into your lineup against Dallas, who succeeds at sacking the quarterback at among the highest rates in the league, puts some of the most pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And Malik Willis has 3 interceptions on the season, averaging 1 per game. It's just a disaster zone. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. And this is the formula for you're starting the Dallas Cowboys defense in DFS, and it may not be highly rostered enough in DFS. So Malik Willis is a player that I'm steering clear of. There's no reason for you to put him in your lineup. And even in a super flex league, you've got better options than Malik Willis as a desperation superflex play. All right, we got to talk about the elephant in the room, and that's that the King may not play. Derrick Henry officially doubtful for Thursday's game against the Dallas Cowboys. And if I'm picking a running back to play the majority of snaps and get the majority of carries and majority of running back targets, it's going to be Hassan Haskins. Now, Haskins on the season, only 11 rush attempts, 50 rushing yards. He's averaging 4.5 yards per carry. He has 7 receptions in 13 games for 31 yards, 4.4 yards per target. But this was a player at Michigan who had a 72 receiving grade. So that was a respectable receiving grade, and he had at least 2 targets in every game since he started getting targets at Michigan. So like in the second half of the season, Hassan Haskins was pretty regularly used in the passing game. He caught 18 of his 20 passes at Michigan his final year. He ran for over 1,200 yards and it was a respectable 4th-round pick. So if I'm picking a guy, it's the guy with the draft capital who can catch the ball, is a capable pass catcher. Yes, this game is probably going to be, I already talked about how it's Tennessee plus 10.5, right? Or we're going to need to get that win against the sports books. So Hassan Haskins, if I'm picking a running back though, that's the player. And I compare that to Julius Chestnut, who is an undrafted free agent and has 5 total carries on the season, right? If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Haskins has operated as the running back 3 for most of the year. Dontrell Hilliard was the running back 2, but he's on IR. So Haskins, I think, is the guy that you want in this Tennessee backfield. If you have to pick, if you're in desperate, dire straits, Hassan Haskins is the play over Julius Chestnut, but it's going to be a tough matchup against Dallas. Let's not get carried away too much. Hassan Haskins, though, is the running back that I expect to get the majority of volume in the Titans backfield. We can talk about Julius Chestnut, I suppose, for a moment. Chestnut, an undrafted free agent, 5'11", 228. Hassan Haskins also 228, but a bigger bodied running back. And Julius Chestnut has only played snaps in 3 games this year. He got carries in 1 game against Philadelphia, 5 rushes, 13 yards, 2.6 yards per carry. And receiving, he has 1 game with 2 targets against Jacksonville, 2 for 8. And so if I'm picking a guy between Haskins and Julius Chestnut, I'm going with the guy with draft capital, that's Hassan Haskins. I'm going with the guy who had been used as the running back 3 going into week 17. And with Derrick Henry expected to miss, I do expect Julius Chestnut to be sprinkled in like a change of pace back. And this is all speculation, but if I'm placing a bet on who is going to be the guy, I think it's more likely to be Hassan Haskins instead of Julius Chestnut. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So start Chestnut as a contrarian play. A desperation contrarian play is how I'm viewing Chestnut. Nothing more than that. Wide receiver Robert Woods, 4 catches, 4 targets. He only had 30 yards. And we've only seen Robert Woods eclipse 50 yards twice on the season. Back in week 3 against Vegas, he went 4 for 85. And then week 11 against Green Bay, 6 for 69. Other than that, Robert Woods has been a massive disappointment. Now, we know he missed half of last year due to the ACL injury. So one could argue he's still working his way back, and he rushed his back, and he's 30 years old, and he's on the wrong side of the age apex, blah, 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 blah. Fine. whatever it is, but there's no reason for you to be plugging in Robert Woods against Dallas. And even though Dallas gives up a lot of fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, Robert Woods is not the play here. The slot wide receiver, he's not the play. Robert Woods, could he fall in the end zone? Like, that's possible, but he only has 1 touchdown on the season, and that was back in week 4. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Yeah, I'm not looking for Robert Woods as a possibility. What Malik Willis has done has nerfed pretty much all of the wide receivers in the wide receiver core. So you're not starting Robert Woods. Let's just save you some time there. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, you're also not starting. Westbrook-Ikhine with Malik Willis in week 16, 2 catches, 23 yards on 3 targets. And it was really, really ugly for Westbrook-Ikhine. Only 3.3 fantasy points. And yeah, it's bad for Westbrook-Ikhine. He's finished as the wide receiver 70, and he finished outside the wide receiver 100 back in week 15, outside the wide receiver 100 in week 13. He fell into the end zone against Jacksonville, but went 3 for 23 and the touchdown on 8 targets. There's only been 3 games this season where Nick Westbrook-Ikhine has more than 4 targets in a game. Yeah, it's just been ugly. So you're not even firing up Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as a desperation flex play, despite the fact that Westbrook-Ikhine has not fallen below 75% of the snaps since week 9. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. So he's running a lot of useless snaps. Don't play him in the Thursday night game. He's not worthy of your starting lineup in fantasy or in DFS. Look, if there's a wide receiver to break one play big, it's Treylon Burks. But Burks goose-egged through the air in week 16 against Houston, and that was with Malik Willis throwing the ball. Willis only completed 14 passes, and Treylon Burks didn't come down with any of them. He had 2 targets in this game and had a rush for 15 yards. Sure, fine, whatever. But Treylon Burks finishing as the wide receiver 90, yuck. Yeah, there's no confidence in Treylon Burks. His over-under on sleepers, 21.5 receiving yards, and I don't know, that feels like an ugly number. I'm not even trying to. The fact that I think that it's going to be possibly that low, and Sleeper thinks it's going to be that low, and Consensus thinks that it's going to be that low, it tells you all you need to know about how everyone views this game. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Even with the talented Treylon Burks, who had a nice little stretch against Denver. Had 6 targets, Green Bay 7 for 111, and Cincinnati 4 for 70, and even Philadelphia before his concussion, 1 catch for 25 yards and the touchdown. So he was on a nice little streak there, and then Ryan Tannehill suffers the injury. Tannehill out for the next few weeks. We'll see if he misses any playoff time. And then Treylon Burks has just his first game back from the concussion. Didn't do very much at all. Treylon Burks is not a start for you. You're not looking to put him in your fantasy lineup stall. Tight end Austin Hooper had 4 targets, and I think that these low average depth of target type of receivers are going to get peppered, and if there's one that somehow accidentally falls into the end zone, it's going to be either Austin Hooper or Chig Okonkwo, but you have to give it to Austin Hooper. Hooper has at least 4 targets in every game since week 10, regardless of the quarterback, and despite that, he's finished as the tight end 20, 16, 3, tight end 23, 23, 7, 27, and 31. So even though he's had a floor of 4 targets in every game, that hasn't translated into fantasy success. Austin Hooper being drafted at the tight end 24 this week on Sleeper, and I think that's a fair spot for him right now. Yeah, it's pretty ugly. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. The fact that he only has 1 projected yard less than Treylon Burks for this game tells you all you need to know about how disastrous this Tennessee offense is going to be going up against the Dallas Cowboys. Chig Okonkwo was a nice story for a while until Ryan Tannehill got injured. But Okonkwo had a streak of 7 games where he had at least 30 receiving yards, and that streak was broken in week 16 against Houston. He went back to his 46% of snaps, 1 catch for 10 yards. It was ugly, 1.5 fantasy points. He was on my sit list for week 16, even against a Houston defense who gives up a lot of fantasy points to opposing tight ends. It's just that Malik Willis was going to start and Treylon Burks was expected back. So Chig Okonkwo is once again, not a tight end option for me. Could he break one off? Sure, but he's being drafted as the tight end 27 this week on Sleeper. So I'm not in on Chig Okonkwo this week. If you like the content and this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. It was a nice story for a few weeks, and I think we'll just have to turn the page to 2023 when Okonkwo hopefully is the starting tight end for the Tennessee Titans. And we'll see how the Titans, whether they keep Ryan Tannehill or move on or whatever the case may be. But I think Okonkwo has definitely deserved to have a significant role for next year after a very impressive stretch during his rookie season.